"Don't set that bowl there," Clarence said. His gaze went to the framed tintype beside the lamp. "My wife used to sit where you're standing." Ursuline stopped with the supper cooling between her hands. The empty chair touched the back of her skirt, and the dead woman's face seemed to watch them both. Clarence had meant to protect a memory. Instead, he had given Ursuline one plain choice step around the ghost, or walk out into the cold and leave him with it. For 3 breaths, she did neither. Clarence saw the hurt gather in her eyes. He had spent 5 years learning to say little, and still chose the one sentence sharp enough to wound her. Ursuline moved at last. She did not use the chair. She carried the bowl around the table, drew a 3-legged stool near the iron stove, and sat with the supper on her lap. "There," she said, "no one has lost her place." Clarence looked at the chair, then at her. "That stew looks stout enough to mend a chimney." "A chimney would have thanked me before insulting the cook." The answer was dry, but her mouth trembled once before it steadied. Clarence felt the tremor as surely as if she had laid a hand against his chest. He took 2 bites. Beef, carrots, onions, and enough black pepper to warm a man from the inside. Then he noticed she had brought only 1 spoon. "You didn't bring your own supper." "I eat after the house closes." "That was not my question, it was the answer you were getting." Clarence fetched a clean bowl and divided the stew, giving her the better share. Ursuline noticed but said nothing. Cold pressed against the glass panes. In the lamplight, the cabin seemed less empty than it had an hour before. That unsettled Clarence more than the silence. Ursuline's eyes passed once over the locked trunk at the foot of his bed. She did not ask about it. She did not ask about the woman in the tintype either. When the bowls were empty, she stood and gathered them. At the door, Clarence said, "Martha used to tell me not to let the fire die overnight." Ursuline paused with one hand on the latch. He did not know whether he meant the stove or the rest of his life. From the way she glanced back, she knew he did not know. "I'll bring more wood tomorrow," she said. "After that, the fire is your concern." She stepped into the dark. Clarence remained by the table, staring at the chair he had kept empty for 5 years. By Sunday, the whole camp expected him to sit beside Ursuline Yates and pretend he meant to court her. If she did not return after what he had just said, the pretense would fail before it properly began. The thought should have troubled him because of the promise he had made. It troubled him because he wanted her to come back. 3 days earlier, Ursuline had found him behind the Yates supper house while he cut beef. "My father owed Cornelius Larkin more than this place can pay before winter," she had said. "He means to forgive the debt if I marry him." "Do you mean to?" "I promised once while my father was dying. I returned the ring 2 years ago." "Then he has his answer." Cornelius believes a woman's answer begins a bargain. She had asked Clarence to let the camp believe they were courting until Sunday supper. He agreed, but only through Sunday. On Monday, he meant to take the last drover's work south. He had not wintered in the Black Hills since Martha died 5 years before. The arrangement was simple. Stand near Ursuline, eat at her table. Let gossip do the rest. Nothing in it required her to bring supper to his cabin after dark. Nothing in it required him to divide the only bowl. By morning, the camp had made a romance out of almost nothing. Men wagered on whether Clarence would shave before Sunday. He did not correct them. From the corrals, his attention kept drifting to the supper house. Ursuline fed miners' freight hands and travelers from dawn until near midnight. She could quiet a drunk with one look, stretch stew for 12 more men, and give a hungry boy bread while claiming it was too stale to sell. She did not need a man to direct her life. She needed one man to stop another from closing his fist around it. Trouble arrived after noon in the shape of 2 freight wagons. Cornelius Larkin climbed down in a dark wool coat that had never brushed a corral rail. A man who owned flour salt and half the winter freight contracts did not need to show iron. Clarence was unloading potatoes at the rear of the supper house when Larkin entered through the front. The room went quiet. Clarence left the sack by the stove and listened from the kitchen doorway. Ursuline, Larkin said. He kept his hat on. "I brought your winter flour. I also brought the ring you returned. We can settle the debt and set the wedding day before I leave." Ursuline stood beside a table with a cleaning rag in her hand. Her shoulders looked small for one instant. Then she folded the rag and laid it down. "The debt will be paid in coin," she said. "The ring remains yours." Larkin's smile did not reach his eyes. "You have no winter flour without me. I have not forgotten arithmetic. I hear you have forgotten good sense. A horse hand living in a rented cabin cannot provision this place." Clarence stepped into the room. He did not touch his revolver. He did not crowd Ursuline. He stopped at her side close enough to make the lie visible and far enough to leave her the floor. "She answered you," he said. Larkin turned. "Mr. Dixon, a wiser man would ask what her answer costs. A wiser man would hear it the first time." A few miners lowered their spoons. Ursuline did not look at Clarence, but the fingers at her side loosened. Larkin studied him. Then he drew a folded paper from his inner pocket. "I hold a beef contract for Fort Laramie. The herd leaves tomorrow morning. I need a lead drover who can bring cattle through bad weather." He placed the paper on the nearest table. "Triple pay." The figure meant a year without taking orders, a dozen good mares, and a clean escape before Sunday. Larkin tapped the contract. "The work begins at sunrise." Clarence felt Ursuline look at him. He should have refused at once. That was what an honorable man standing in a false courtship ought to do. Instead, he said, "I'll read it." Ursuline's shoe scraped the floor. Clarence heard the hurt in that small sound. Pastor David Kessler rose from a rear table with his coffee cup. He served as preacher, letter writer, and peacemaker whenever the camp needed one of the three. "Sunday supper begins at 4, David said. "Mr. Larkin, you are welcome to attend. Business can wait until the blessing is said." Larkin tipped his hat at last, though only to Ursuline. "I shall be there." He left the contract behind. When the door closed, Ursuline returned to her ledger. She meant to buy small stores from scattered claims, paying too much, rather than owe Larkin another favor. It was a poor plan. It was also hers. Clarence put the contract inside his vest. "You ought to know I haven't signed it. You ought to know I did not ask." "No." She dipped her pen again. "Will you be at supper on Sunday?" "I said I would. That is all I require." Her voice was even. The warmth of the night before had vanished from it. Clarence had the particular discomfort of a man who had kept his word and still behaved like a coward. To make the courtship believable, he ate at the supper house on Friday. He usually took his meals by the corrals, where horses asked no questions, and men had work enough to keep from asking many. That day he entered at noon and chose a place near the end of the long table. Conversation dipped. Ursuline brought hash and coffee. You chose the seat nearest the door. Habit. An encouraging quality in a suitor. Clarence tasted the hash. Needs pepper. You may ride south in search of some. Her eyes met his. He reached for the pepper tin. This will do. The corner of her mouth moved. Clarence had thought her capable long before he thought her beautiful. That noon, he understood the danger in the order of those thoughts. She knocked 2 serving spoons to the floor. Clarence picked them up. "I can manage spoons," she said. "I saw that." Her look could have soured milk. When he handed them over, his fingers brushed her wrist. He carried the feel of it through the meal. After the rush, Ursuline asked him to walk with her to the storehouse. They kept a proper distance, because the whole camp was watching from windows and doorways. A blasting charge sounded. A young roan reared at the hitching rail, and its teamster lifted a whip. Clarence caught the man's wrist. "Put that away. He'll break the rail. He'll break more if you teach him fear." The man lowered the whip. Clarence approached with open hands and a low voice. He waited with one palm on the trembling neck until the horse lowered its head. When he turned, Ursuline was watching him. What he asked, "You are patient when the creature cannot thank you." Horses rarely argue over pepper. They have better judgment than men. They continued to the storehouse. In the storehouse, Ursuline checked the dwindling flour. The rules remain. You do not pay my debt. I do not ask for promises you do not mean. Fair. And we do not use your wife's memory to gain sympathy. Martha's name is not a coin. No, nor am I. Clarence met her eyes. I know. I believe you are trying to. It left him room to earn forgiveness. That evening she brought coffee to his cabin. "I was passing," she said. "The supper house is the other way." I took a broad road. She set the tin on the table and noticed that Martha's tintype had moved from the center to the corner. Clarence had spent half the morning feeling disloyal, and the other half ashamed of it. "Your fire is low," she said. "I'll tend it." "See that you do." After she left, Clarence stood by the table. The empty chair no longer seemed like proof of love. It looked like a place he had been guarding from every living thing, himself included. Saturday brought more customers than the supper house could hold. A mining crew and 2 freight outfits filled every bench. Clarence ate early, then found reasons not to leave. He carried water, split kindling, and told himself he was helping the courtship look true. Near 10, Ursuline sent her exhausted girls home and served the last plates alone. When the final customer stumbled out, she locked the front door and leaned her forehead against it. Clarence saw her shoulders drop. It was the first time he had ever seen Ursuline stop holding herself up. He rose without speaking, gathered a stack of greasy plates, and carried them to the kitchen. She followed him. "What are you doing? Ruining my reputation." "You have one, so I am told." He poured hot water from the stove reservoir into the wash basin. She stared at him another moment, then tied her apron tighter and began scraping plates. They worked without fuss. He washed and hauled ashes. She dried and wiped the tables. The work was ordinary. That made it dangerous. Clarence knew whether bad cattle and armed men. He did not know what to do with Ursuline humming because someone had lifted half her weight. When the room was clean, she sat on a crate and drew the last bowl from the stove. Burnt stew clung to the bottom. Clarence set his untouched supper before her. She looked at the tender beef. "You saved this. I forgot to eat. You sat beside it for 2 hours. I have a poor memory." She pushed it back. Clarence returned it. Ursuline. Her name changed the air. He took the burnt scraps for himself. "These build character. You possess enough character to survive without them. Then I am eating for pleasure." A tired laugh escaped her. It was small and rough, and Clarence would have traded Larkin's triple wages to hear it again. They ate in the quiet kitchen. Afterward, Clarence opened the back door. The cold had sharpened. Stars shone over the black pines, and frost silvered the road. He should have said good night. Instead, he sat on the wooden step and left the door open behind him. Ursuline joined him. Their shoulders did not touch at first. Neither spoke. Then her head settled against him. Clarence went still. The weight was slight. The trust was not. He wanted to put an arm around her, but she had leaned against him because she was tired, not because the camp had named them sweethearts. He kept his hands still and let her choose the closeness. When she settled more comfortably against him, the adjustment felt more intimate than a kiss. Footsteps sounded on the frozen road. David Kessler passed with a lantern. He looked at them, then toward the sky. Snow by morning. "Your gift for romance is without equal," Ursuline said. "I save my best words for funerals and collections." David tipped his hat and continued on. The mention of mourning brought Larkin's contract back between them. Ursuline lifted her head. Clarence missed the warmth at once. "You could still take his offer," she said. "I could. And I could sign his ledger, keep the flower, and call the whole matter sensible." Clarence stared across the road. "It would keep your house open." She turned toward him. "Are you advising me to marry him?" "I am saying you need not lose everything merely to prove you can refuse a man." Her face hardened. "This is not pride." "I did not call it pride. You make a habit of leaving before winter and call that prudence." "Perhaps our words differ." Clarence stood. "I have reasons." "So does every man who runs." Anger rose because it was easier than truth. "Martha died in a camp like this. Snow closed the trail. I buried her when the ground was so hard 3 men had to break it with picks." Ursuline's expression changed, but she did not step back. "I swore I would never spend another winter in these hills," he said. "I would not sit in another cabin and wait to lose what was under my roof. You keep that chair empty as though emptiness can keep a promise." Clarence's jaw tightened. She came to her feet. "You are not guarding Martha. You are guarding yourself from the chance that life might ask something of you again." Easy judgment from a woman who feeds a whole camp rather than admit she needs help. Color rose in her face. "I admit it every time I pay wages. I admitted it when I asked you to stand beside me. Needing help is not surrendering my choice." He looked away. The contract inside his vest seemed to weigh more than a rifle. Ursuline's voice softened. "I do not want her place, Clarence." He looked back at her. "I do not want her chair, her memories, or the love you gave her. I want to know whether there is any room in you that belongs to the living." The answer came from a part of him he had kept closed for years. "I am not afraid I'll forget Martha," he said. "I am afraid I'll wake happy one morning and discover I no longer feel guilty for it." Ursuline's anger left her. She stood close enough that he could see the tiredness beneath her eyes and the sorrow she would not turn into pity. "Then perhaps guilt has taken more from her memory than happiness ever could," she said. Clarence had no answer. Ursuline went inside. Before shutting the door, she looked at him once. "Sunday supper is at 4. The latch fell between them. Clarence remained on the step until the cold reached through his coat. Sunday morning came gray with snow waiting in the clouds. Clarence saddled his bay before breakfast. He told himself he only meant to check the girth. The bedroll was already tied behind the cantle. His winter coat lay across the saddle. Cornelius Larkin waited by the corral gate. "You have not signed," Larkin said. Clarence drew the folded contract from his vest. "The herd leaves within the hour. Take the work, and you earn a year's wages. Stay here, and you gain a woman with a failing business and a debt she will not let you pay. That is not for you to weigh." Larkin's eyes moved to the saddlebags. "You swore you would not winter here after your wife died. A man ought to honor the dead." The words were chosen well. Larkin had found the respectable name for fear and offered it back to Clarence as virtue. Clarence laid the paper against the saddle and took out a pencil. He could ride south and call it faithfulness to Martha. He could even claim he was sparing Ursuline, an uncertain man. He shifted the saddlebag to make a firm riding surface. The flap opened. Inside lay a piece of cornbread wrapped in a clean cloth. Ursuline must have put it there while he carried wood the night before. She had not known whether he would stay. She had fed him for the road anyway. Clarence held the bread in one hand and the contract in the other. Martha had once told him not to let the fire die. For 5 years he had mistaken ashes for faithfulness. He put the pencil away. Then he folded the contract once slowly and pressed it back into Larkin's gloved hand. "Keep your paper." Larkin's fingers closed around it. His face darkened. "This proves nothing." "The courtship began as a lie," Clarence said. "My wanting to stay did not. You will regret it by deep snow." "Likely. A man may regret a thing and still choose it." Larkin turned toward the supper house. Clarence caught his arm, not hard, but firmly enough to stop him. "You will not shame her in her own room. Take your hand off me. When you can enter like a customer and speak like a decent man." For a moment, Larkin looked as though he might swing. Clarence would almost have welcomed the simpler contest. Then Larkin pulled free and straightened his coat. "I mean to collect what I am owed. Then ask for coin, not a wife." Larkin walked on. Clarence followed. Inside the supper house, Ursuline and David were counting flour sacks. She looked at Clarence's coat, the bedroll visible through the front window, and then at his empty hands. Larkin entered behind him. He was ready to ride, Larkin said. He nearly signed. "Your grand courtship is a tavern trick, Ursuline, and by evening every man here will know it." Clarence did not step in front of her. "I considered the work," he said. "I had my horse packed. I returned the contract unsigned. The first part is my shame. The second is my answer." Hurt moved across Ursuline's face, followed by something steadier. She turned to Larkin. "My father's debt is mine," she said. "You will be paid in gold coin or goods by spring. You have no flour to last until then. Then we will serve smaller biscuits." A startled breath of laughter came from David. Larkin ignored him. "You would risk this house for stubbornness." "I will risk it for ownership of my own life." He reached into his coat and produced the ring. Ursuline did not touch it. "I returned that 2 years ago," she said. "Take your flour if you must. Take the ring. You will not take me with either." Larkin looked from her to Clarence. For once his money could not command the room. "I will send men for the sacks before dark." When he left, silence settled over the supper house. Ursuline gripped the edge of the table. Clarence wanted to go to her. He stayed where he was until she chose to look at him. "You packed your horse," she said. "Yes." "You returned the contract." "Yes." "Why?" "Because leaving would have been the same old fear wearing a new coat." David cleared his throat. "I believe the Lord has called me to inspect the kitchen." Neither of them answered. He went anyway. Clarence took one step closer. "I cannot promise I will never be afraid. I can promise not to call it duty when I run from you." Ursuline's eyes shone, though her voice remained firm. "That is nearer the truth. I want to be here at 4. You said you would." "I am not speaking of the pretense." She studied him for a long moment. "Then come to your cabin at 2, she said. "We have stew to carry, and I will not let you cut the salt pork without supervision." It was not forgiveness in full. It was a door left unlatched. At 2, Ursuline knocked on Clarence's cabin with empty hands. He opened in a clean shirt, his shaving uneven. "Did the razor object?" she asked. It fought with courage. The razor won. He stepped aside. Martha's tintype no longer stood beside the chair. Clarence had placed it on a clean shelf above the bed, still within the lamplight. He had not hidden his wife. He had stopped asking her memory to keep everyone else away. Ursuline looked at the chair, then at him. "Where shall I sit?" "Where you please." She chose the stool by the stove. Clarence felt a foolish pinch of disappointment. Then she pulled the stool beside his chair until their knees nearly touched. "Do not mistake freedom for distance," she said. He sat. Clarence set his hands on his thighs. "I want more than an afternoon of pretending." Ursuline's breath caught, but she did not look away. "I want you to knock when snow covers the road," he continued. "I want to know which customer has cheated himself by skipping breakfast. I want to hear you insult my cooking until spring. That could require great devotion. I am prepared to suffer." A smile warmed her face. Then it faded into seriousness. "I want you here, Clarence, but I will not spend winter wondering whether every silence means you are saddling to leave. You should not have to. I will not take Martha's place. I am not offering it." "What are you offering?" Clarence looked at her, and for once he did not search for a joke or a careful half-truth. "My own place," he said, "beside yours if you still want it." Ursuline reached across the small space between them and laid her hand over his. "I do," she said, "provided you learn to cut pork smaller than fence posts." He turned his hand and held hers. The touch was quiet. The choice inside it was not. They made stew together. Clarence cut the meat too large, and Ursuline halved each piece while muttering about men who mistook a knife for an axe. By 4, they carried the pot to the community tent. The whole camp had come. Cornelius Larkin sat near the front, expecting Ursuline to soften before an audience. She entered ahead of Clarence. He led her. She placed the stew on the serving table, reached into her apron pocket, and brought out the ring Larkin had left 2 years before. She set it in front of him. "The debt stands," she said clearly. "The promise does not. I will pay what my father owed. I will not pay it with my life." No one spoke. Larkin closed his hand around the ring. Ursuline turned away before he could answer. She crossed the tent toward Clarence. He felt every eye follow her. But the camp no longer mattered as much as the question in her face. "The play is finished," he said. "Do you still want me here?" "I want you here," she answered. "Not as my guard, not as a tail for the camp, and not because I brought you supper." Clarence's throat tightened. "I want Ursuline Yates, not the supper house or the chance to feel useful. I want the woman who feeds people and still expects them to carry their own weight." A miner near the back whispered, "That sounds like courting." David Kessler answered, "At last." Soft laughter moved through the tent. Clarence pulled out a chair for Ursuline, then waited. She took hold of the back and shifted it nearer his own before sitting. Her choice, her distance. Clarence sat beside her. Only one serving spoon remained, a piece of meddling David would deny from the pulpit. Clarence gave Ursuline the best cut of beef. She broke her cornbread and put half on his plate. Under the table, her hand found his. The camp began talking again. Cornelius left before the blessing. The winter problem remained. Before sundown, Larkin's men rolled the flour sacks out one by one. When the last wagon left, pale rectangles of dust marked the storehouse floor. Ursuline stood in the doorway with her ledger held against her ribs, looking at the bare boards where winter bread had been. Clarence did not tell her not to worry. Worry was the honest price of the choice she had made. By dusk, 3 small claims had promised part of their stores, and a freighter agreed to bring a wagon load before deep snow if Ursuline paid half in advance. Until then, she would stretch cornmeal and potatoes. Clarence offered to buy a share of winter cattle, not to pay her debt, but to take the same risk she did. She accepted after arguing over every figure. That evening snow began against the cabin window. Clarence lit the lamp, then knelt before the locked trunk at the foot of his bed. Ursuline stood near the stove with 2 bowls in her hands. "If that contains another contract, I shall put it in the fire." "No paper." He unlocked the trunk. Inside lay woodworking tools and a half-finished fiddle, its maple body smooth but unvarnished. Ursuline set down the bowls. "I was making it for Martha," Clarence said. "She wanted music for the first dance after thaw. She died in February." He touched the pale wood with 2 fingers. "I locked it away because finishing it felt like leaving her behind." Ursuline came close, but did not reach for the fiddle. "What does it feel like now?" she asked. Clarence considered the question. "Like work. I still know how to do." He carried the tools to the table. The tintype remained on the shelf, not banished and no longer between them. "I could finish by spring," he said. "If the supper house keeps a man fed, it will remain open." "You sound certain. I have a wagon load promised before deep snow, enough cornmeal to stretch the biscuits until it comes, and a cowboy foolish enough to buy cattle in winter. That cowboy expects a return. You may have 1 bowl of stew each day. Robbery. 2 when the chimney needs mending." Clarence laughed. It had been so long since laughter came without guilt that he almost stopped. Ursuline squeezed his arm and he let it stay. They arranged the tools beside her ledger. 2 lives did not join cleanly. They crowded one another and required room, patience, and the occasional moving of a chair. When supper was ready, Clarence drew out the heavy wooden chair Martha had once used. Ursuline looked at it. He did not offer it as an inheritance. He did not ask her to prove anything by taking it. She pulled a 3-legged stool close to his side instead, and sat with her shoulder against his arm. Clarence took the chair. Outside, the first snow covered the road he had planned to ride south. Inside, 2 bowls steamed beside the unfinished fiddle. Clarence had not given Ursuline another woman's place. He had stopped leaving his own empty.